Good evening, and welcome to this deep dive into a story that has recently upended political landscapes across the globe and reopened old wounds in excruciating detail. We are talking, of course, about the massive, unprecedented release of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell that occurred in late January of this year, 2026. For years, the phrase Epstein files has been shorthand for conspiracy, suspicion, and a clamor for accountability among the global elite. Many assumed that previous court unsealings had told us most of what there was to know, but what happened on January 30th, 2026 proved that assumption entirely wrong. Following the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed into law in late 2025, the Department of Justice was legally mandated to open the vaults, and they did. What emerged was a staggering deluge of information, approximately 3 million pages of documents, alongside 2,000 videos and nearly 180,000 images. The sheer volume of this material is difficult to comprehend. It includes FBI diagrams painstakingly charting victim networks, internal DOJ notes debating legal strategies, and extensive, unfiltered correspondence between Epstein, Maxwell, and their vast circle of associates. However, the immediate story emerging from this release wasn't just about the powerful names contained within the files. It was about a catastrophic failure by the Department of Justice in handling this sensitive material. This was meant to be an act of transparency designed to serve the public interest and provide some measure of closure. Instead, it turned into a nightmare for many survivors. The redaction process was deeply, tragically flawed. In the rush to comply with the legal mandate, the DOJ failed to adequately protect the identities of dozens of victims. We're talking about names, personal details, and, most horrifyingly, unredacted nude images of individuals who were minors at the time these crimes occurred, being released onto the open internet. The backlash was instantaneous and furious. Attorneys representing the victims immediately filed legal actions demanding the shutdown of websites hosting the data to protect survivors from further abuse. The United Nations human rights experts issued a blistering statement condemning the flawed disclosure process. They argued that these botched redactions undermined the very concept of accountability and served only to severely re-traumatize victims who have already endured enough. It is a stark reminder that in the pursuit of exposing the perpetrators, the system once again failed to protect the prey. Beyond this profound ethical disaster, the files themselves have triggered significant international political fallout. We are seeing what some commentators are calling the Epstein effect, where the consequences of associating with Epstein seem to be toppling high-ranking officials in Europe far more quickly than in the United States. Let's look at the United Kingdom first. The files sparked a major political scandal for the Labour government. The new documents revealed that Peter Mandelson, a prominent Labour peer and ambassador, maintained contact with Epstein during his time serving as business secretary. The revelations were damaging enough that Mandelson resigned from both his diplomatic post and the House of Lords. But the damage didn't stop with him. The radioactive nature of these revelations reached right into 10 Downing Street. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's own Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, was forced to resign for taking responsibility for advising on Mandelson's appointment in the first place. It shows how toxic any proximity to the Epstein orbit remains in British politics. The shockwaves traveled north to Norway as well. Thorbjorn Jagland, a former Norwegian prime minister, found himself facing charges of aggraved corruption. These charges were the direct result of investigations spurred by ties released in these newly released files. It is a concrete example of historical documentation leading to present-day legal peril for world leaders. Now, when we turn our gaze to the United States, the reaction has been different. The two biggest names that have hovered over this entire saga for years, former Presidents Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, appear frequently throughout the 3 million pages. The documents include items like FBI summaries of tips received regarding Donald Trump. Yet, despite the volume of references, the political consequences here have been less immediate than across the Atlantic. There have been no new charges filed against either former president based on this document dump. However, the current administration is not unscathed. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick is facing intense scrutiny and calls for his resignation. The issue stems from testimony he previously gave regarding his interactions with Epstein, which now appears to contradict the concrete details found in the new correspondence and travel logs. He is currently in a very precarious political position. It is critical to emphasize, as we always must when discussing these files, that being named in these documents does not automatically indicate criminal activity. Epstein built a network that was as much about social climbing and professional leverage as it was about his crimes. We see this in the breadth of other notable figures whose interactions were detailed in the release. The files flesh out the relationships Epstein had with cultural and business icons. There is correspondence with Deepak Chopra regarding finances and news stories. There are emails involving Noam Chomsky discussing the use of Epstein's residences. The ties to billionaire Les Webner were further detailed, with lawmakers now referring to him as one of several previously hidden names that have finally been exposed to the light. These documents paint a picture of a man who ingratiated himself into the absolute highest echelons of academia, finance, and culture. And, of course, there is Prince Andrew. If there was any hope for his rehabilitation in the eyes of the public or the royal family, these files seem to have extinguished it completely. The new details have only further alienated him. Reports coming out of London indicate that he has been effectively evicted from his longtime residence at the Royal Lodge. It appears that King Charles and Prince William are taking decisive steps to create a permanent, unbridgeable distance between the monarchy and the ongoing scandal. So where do we stand now, weeks after this massive disclosure? Legally, the Department of Justice is signaling that this might be the end of the road regarding federal prosecutions. Despite the mountain of new paper, the DOJ has stated that previous reviews of much of this evidence did not yield sufficient grounds for new charges to third parties. But politically, the fight is far from over. In Washington, there is a bipartisan eruption of anger directed at the DOJ, not just for the botched redactions, but for what is still missing. Lawmakers, including Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, are publicly accusing the Justice Department of muddying the waters. They claim that despite the clear mandate of the Transparency Act, the DOJ is still withholding roughly 50% of the relevant files. They are vowing to use congressional authority to force further disclosures. So, while we're drowning in 3 million pages of information, the terrifying reality is that we may still only be looking at half the picture. The story of Jeffrey Epstein's network is vast, dark, and it seems far from completely told.